Alright, tubes, what is going on? Hopefully you guys are having, are going to have, did have a very happy new year. I speak in such generic terms because I'm not exactly sure when this video is going to go up. But anyway, it should be pretty close to the new year, and as you can see, as the year goes on, my camera angle gets progressively higher and higher. Anyway, we're coming to you with a brand new video here today, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be installing the dash cam. If you didn't see that video that I did about a month ago, check it out. I got this really sweet dash cam. I'll show it to you in brief detail here. It's a Blackvue DR750S-2CH channel, and what that means is it's actually got two separate cameras here, and I'll have one forward facing and one backwards. And I also picked up some neat accessories here that will allow me to run this thing in parking mode and really take advantage of all the features that it came with. But anyway, what my goal here to do is, I'm not going to do it like just this exact setup I have here with the Power Magic Pro and the fuse taps and all that. If you're looking to do a real basic setup with just a forward facing camera, let's say you don't have the dual channel here, and all you're looking to do is plug it into your socket, your 12-volt power socket, you know, this video will cover that. But if you have a more advanced camera, if you have a dual channel like this, or if you have one that has parking mode, and you're looking to do a hardwire setup, whatever the case may be, I'm going to take this video in stages, and that way it'll show you exactly what you need to do for whatever your particular goals for your setup are. Alright, so the first thing we're going to want to do here is we want to clear off our windshield of any dirt, dust, and grime, and anything like that that'll prevent our camera mount from sticking. And of course, if you have a rear camera, make sure you do the back window too. Then you can go ahead and figure out exactly where you want to position your camera, and things to keep in mind are, of course, if you have a screen to look at, if you have buttons, or LEDs, anything like that you're going to need to access, and also where your cables are going to be. Make sure they're not going to run into anything. Once you have a spot chosen, you can remove the plastic backing off the 3M tape and then stick it to the windshield. Of course, 3M tape isn't your only option. If you're going to go the route with a standard suction cup mount, that'll work too. In my case, I have a rear-facing camera as well, so I'm going to go ahead and pick out a spot for that and stick it to the back of the windshield. Next, we're ready to start routing our cables. And as you'll see, I like to go for a very clean install so you don't see any of the wires. One of the things that I found is removing some trim pieces is very helpful with this process. Take for example this piece here, which covers up part of the headliner and runs down along the A-pillar. If I take it out, I can run my wires behind the clips that hold it on directly along the A-pillar. The wires will be tucked up behind it. You'll never see them. You don't have to worry about them coming out. And you just pop it back in the same way it came out. Engage the clips and you're good to go. Since I've got a dual channel camera, I have two cables here. However, you only have the power cable if you're only going for a front-facing single channel camera setup. So I decided to simulate that here. So once you get to this point, if all you were going for was a simple forward-facing camera with a 12-volt power socket running up to it, you would pretty much be finished here. As you can see here, just for demonstration, I plugged right into the 12-volt power socket here, and I didn't totally put this kick panel back in here because I'm going to be going further than this. But if that was all you wanted to do, you know, tuck your extra wiring up inside there or wherever you have space on your particular vehicle, and you'd have yourself a nice clean install. I mean, once these wires are tucked in here, I mean, you can't see anything going up here. Not everything is totally hidden, and then power comes right down to the camera. So very nice and clean setup there. Now, if you're still watching at this point, you're probably in one of three boats. You've either got a rear-facing camera that you still need to hook up. You've got a front-facing camera that you want to wire into a Power Magic Pro so that you can take advantage of parking mode features, or maybe you got all three. So let us continue. I think what I'm going to do first is I'm going to wire up the rear-facing camera, and the reason I'm going to do that is if I want to, before I actually go ahead and wire up the Power Magic Pro, I can still power the camera off the 12-volt socket there, and then I'll at least still have both cameras operating. As you can see here, they supply quite a bit of connection cable with the camera. And so where I decided to run it was actually where I've run some cables and wires in the past, and where that is underneath this panel here. The way I get the wire under there is it sort of requires two hands, but basically I just lift up the panel and tuck the wire underneath. You just have to be careful because as you're doing it, you can end up pulling the wire through. So if this happens, just make sure you give yourself some slack. Now here's one thing I want to make a note of while I'm filming here. As I showed you guys, they come with a pretty long connector cable. In our case, we're going to need to coil it up somewhere. You want to keep that into consideration because, for example, let's say that I decided I wanted to coil it up in there. Well, by the time I got all this wire tucked up, you know, behind all this stuff and hooked up to the camera, there might be a lot of resistance to try and pull it back through to then coil up the excess. So if I was going to go that route, what I would want to do is try and measure out just a rough estimate of how much cable I'm going to need. And as you can see, you got a pretty good loop here, and what we would want to do is try and pull most of that back out through before we went and tucked everything up inside. It's just a little side note there for you to help you guys out. I'm actually going to start back up right at the rear camera here by plugging in the cable. Then I can start tucking it into the ceiling, running it along the trim here, and figuring out exactly where I want it to go. As was the case before, the goal is to tuck it behind whatever trim pieces I can so that in the end you can't see any cable. Take a look here. It's a nice clean install and it's completely hidden until it comes out to the camera. Then I just took my excess, I coiled it up and stuck it behind my passenger seat. Anywhere will do as long as it's out of the way and won't get caught on anything. Alright, so that wraps up the hookup of the rear camera, and I mean it was very simple. All we had to do is run single cable to it. But I always like to take the time and really focus on my cable routing and go for as clean of an install as possible. So you don't see a single piece of that cable from this point here. Eventually, you won't see any of that. Nothing up here. You don't see it again until it comes out going to the camera there. And that's how I like it. One thing I also wanted to point out is I'm not really finding myself using it because I'm not tucking anything under weather stripping. But Blackvue, when they send these cameras out, they actually include this little tool here, which in my review I said I couldn't believe that. I was really impressed by that. And what it's for is it's just this hard little plastic tool that's meant for going up underneath weather stripping and whatnot if you're trying to tuck wires in underneath. And they got the two different size ends on there, and I can imagine this thing would be extremely useful if I was tucking behind weather stripping. And I have done that, not in this particular install, but I've helped friends with their cars, and I have had to do that in the past. All right, so the last step here, the final stage or level of install difficulty. I guess you could say difficulty, even though this isn't really harder. It's just another step. But anyway, it's hooking up our PowerMagic Pro here, and the particular camera which I am installing here, the Blackvue DR750S-2CH channel, along with a number of other different ones that you can get from the DASHCAM store, have what's called parking mode. And what that simply is these DASHCAMs actually have the capability to record while the vehicle is parked. And you can set them up so that they're triggered by a certain threshold of motion or various other things. Now let's say that you're running this type of setup here where the camera is powered via a 12-volt socket here. Well, chances are you're either going to plug it in and unplug it each time you start the vehicle, or if you have certain foreign vehicles, or aka other vehicles other than Ford, at least to me, that 12-volt socket will just come on when you turn the key on, so you don't really even have to mess with it. Every time you turn on the ignition, your cameras come on. However, if you want parking mode to really function the way it's intended to, you really want to use one of these kits here. The reason being is that this setup here actually has separate inputs for accessory power and constant battery power. So this box here will be able to tell whether or not your ignition is on, and therefore be able to power the dash cam accordingly. The other really nice thing about this is it's got a built-in timer feature and voltage cutoff feature. So what that means is it'll prevent your dash cam from wearing out your battery when it's in parking mode. And it's even got a switch right on there, and so if you don't want to use parking mode at all on this thing, you can just shut it right off at the box. And if you just change your mind, it's as easy as flipping that switch. Now getting this thing installed is pretty simple. The first step is going to be figuring out where to put it. Obviously we're going to need to put it somewhere where we can get to the switch, and we also want to make sure that the wires won't be too short. In the end, I chose the glove box because it's out of the way, out of sight, and it'll keep things clean. They even provide screws as well as 3M tape to get the box mounted. I ended up going with the 3M tape. Now it's time to wire the box, and there's 3 wires. We have our ground, our 12-volt constant power supply from the battery, and our accessory power supply, which is a switched ignition source. First we'll hook up our ground. We can go to any point on the chassis, but I decided to go with this point here. I knew it would be a good spot to use because it was already being used by the factory. I just hooked up my wire, tucked it under the bolt, and then tightened things back up. The final thing we need to do is get power to our box from our switched and constant 12-volt power sources. These fuse taps, which are included in the hardware kit, are extremely useful. These are really nice because they allow you to use an existing vehicle circuit to power your accessory, whatever that may be. In this case, it's the dash cam. Your best bet is to check your user manual for what fuses have constant power and which ones are switched. Usually things like brake lights will have constant power, whereas your radio will have a switched power source. Now, as it just so happens, I happen to already have a switched as well as a constant power supply running up to where I'm working here. So I'm just going to tap right into those wires. Alright, so I'm getting pretty near to the completion of my installation here. And so as I mentioned, I actually already had a fused and constant power supply running up to this area anyway. So I just took advantage of them. So I hooked up my my red wire to my switched ignition source and my yellow wire to my constant 12-volt power source, and that's it as far as that goes. And the only other connection that needed to be made was this connection right here. You just plug your power end of your camera into the socket right here and you're good to go. And as you can see, I've tied up the excess cable here with one of the original cable ties that came with the camera, and did the same thing here. And so at this point I'm ready to tuck this stuff up inside of here, and hopefully it'll all fit nicely behind this kick panel here. Now, there was one thing I wanted to make sure was clear here. Let's say you are in a likely scenario where you don't happen to have power sources run up exactly to where your wires are coming down. What my recommendation would be is, of course, use these fuse taps. They're great. And then again, check your owner's manual to figure out which fuses are constantly supplied with power and which ones only have power when your ignition is on. And as I mentioned, things like brake lights, your horns, stuff like that is always going to have power. Things like your radio, your turn signals, ECU, all that stuff is only going to have power when the ignition's on. Now, you have to be careful because you'll find that some circuits for the radio, some circuits for the ECU and whatnot might have power to them, even when the ignition is off. So it's just a matter of hooking them up, testing them, and if you find that they actually have power going to them when you don't want them to, well, then just try another circuit. And then what I would recommend you do is, it's probably going to be in your best interest to locate this box relatively close to your fuse panel. Now, if you're comfortable with soldering, it's not a big deal because you could extend these leads to wherever you want. But if you're not into soldering and you're just going to use the supplied crimp connectors, you're only going to have so much length in here. Those wires aren't particularly long, so you're going to have to keep that box somewhat close to the fuse panel. Other than that, you shouldn't really have any issues. Alrighty folks, I think we have success here. Just tucked our panel back into place, and you don't see any of the wires at all unless you're looking for them. The only way you can see it is if you get way down here. You can see our yellow wire coming down a little bit, but you got to be looking for that, otherwise you're never going to see it. So I think that's about going to wrap up our install. If we flip our little switch here for parking mode, our little light comes on. And if we take a look at the camera, we got our indicators flashing, so that means we got power up here. And likewise, we flip our switch off here. That's the parking mode switch once again. We turn our ignition on. Once again, we've got power. Camera takes a little bit to boot up, but I can see our GPS light on, and in any moment here our recording LED will probably start blinking too. There you go. Alrighty now, so that is going to do it for this video. Thank you all for sticking around and watching this video. Your support definitely helps me out a lot, and hopefully my videos can help you out a lot. If anything that was unclear or what have you, be sure to leave a comment. I'll get back to you just as quickly as I can. And also check the description. I'm going to have some links for you guys down there for the particular camera that I installed, and also my go-to place for getting dash cams, which is the DASHCAM store. They've been great to me, and they've really and any time I've ever dealt with them, it's always been a very pleasurable experience, and so that's my go-to place now. Other than that, I think that's going to be about it. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. See you later, tubes. Don't forget to subscribe.